Isn't it crazy to think how many childhood franchises of ours have been around for 20 years now? Jak and Daxter turned 20 2 years ago, Kingdom Hearts reached that milestone last year, I even made a video in celebration of the first Spider-Man movie turning 20, Ratchet and Clank also reached 20. It's insane how long these things have been around. And it should come as no surprise that yes, I feel quite old knowing that. I'm going to ignore that old feeling though, as I want to talk about another franchise which recently turned 20, as I'm hopefully uploading this video with no delays. The video was delayed. Sly Cooper. For those who don't know me, I was a PlayStation kid growing up, and the PS2 is probably my favorite console ever. I could make an entire video praising all of the IPs born on the PS2, which I loved back then and I still love now. But Sly Cooper, I'd say, is my personal favorite. The story, the characters, the visual style, the humor, the stylistic gameplay, that one movie which died a horrible death before it even came out, that TV show which might be a fever dream. There's plenty to love about Sly Cooper and be said about Sly Cooper, so what would I talk about in honor of his 20th anniversary, even if a bit late? Well, how about the fact that I'm still bitter about the cliffhanger ending of Thieves in Time, 10 years later. I do need to be on time with something, and this game does turn 10 soon, so what better time than now, right? If you're a Sly Cooper fan, or you got to know me since the release of the 4th game, then you know that Thieves in Time ended on a cliffhanger which absolutely no one liked, regardless of their opinion on the entire game. And while there are rumors of a 5th game happening at some point, that is still the most aggravating cliffhanger I've ever experienced in anything. And at the time of this video, this 5th game has no official word on it, so we don't know if it's ever going to be resolved. So instead of celebrating a franchise I love dearly, I'm gonna talk about how stupid of a cliffhanger this is, and you know what, let's throw a story analysis of the game in general because we are already here, so, you know, why not? I must stress though that no matter what I say about the story, I think Thieves in Time is a good game. A great one even. It's loyal to the series, the controls are tight, I enjoy playing as the ancestors and trying out the costumes Sly gets. There's plenty of variety, but it also feels focused and not overambitious. As a game, Thieves in Time is a good game, which does match its predecessors despite the different developer, and I still enjoy revisiting it alongside them. Sadly, however, the story for the game does not hold up, and that's even before the cliffhanger happens. I know I'm not the first one bashing the story on YouTube, but I think I have enough contradicting opinions to bring to the table, so you know what, let's give it a shot and dive right in. Mandatory recap: Sly Cooper is the latest in the Cooper family's thieving line. An orphan who lost his father as a kid, but grew up to reclaim his family's honor, disposing their old and his future heirloom out of their archenemy, discovering his family's treasure, and constantly running away from, not to mention oftentimes flirting with, the law. What else can a thief do after accomplishing all of that? I guess Sly thought this is where things should end naturally, as by the end of the 3rd game, following the discovery and then loss of his family's treasure, he decides to hang up the cane, fake amnesia, and start a new life with Carmelita, the officer who chased him around and was his primary love interest. We open Thieves in Time years after. Sly is now a police officer and in a relationship with Carmelita. Bentley has started a lab with his own girlfriend, Penelope, and Maury is a racing and demolition derby champion. What would drag those three back to the life of crime? Well, it turns out that the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus, the book which documented the thieving history of the Coopers, are vanishing without explanation, which urges Bentley to get the gang back together. Once the gang reunites, the Turtle explains that the solution to the problem would be time travel, as he's been making a time machine ever since their last adventure together. Sly and his gang now must travel to the Cooper family's past and team up with Sly's ancestors and figure out who's behind this whole mess. Now this setup ain't terrible. There's a reason for the gang to reunite and go on another adventure together, there's a mystery which is slowly being built up as the game goes along, we get to meet the ancestors for the first time instead of just hearing about them, but we'll get to them later, and even the time travel comes from that tease left at the end of Slide 3. Really guys, the basic plot itself isn't that bad. But I do have one issue with it. Even before this whole book thing comes into the plot, Sly is already willing to get back into crime because he felt the itch come back, and is considering a quick solo heist just as Bentley comes in with the bad news. This bugs me for a few reasons. For starters, Sly made a conscious choice to leave crime so he could be with Carmelita. Why make it so that his return to crime is so generic? The same guy who decided to take life into his own hands, not to be bound by his family line anymore, and make his own choices, just felt going back to crime because he felt like it? Really? It's even more annoying when you take into account that there is a reason for him to go back to crime, and that's the book vanishing. Sly has a reason to return to Tivin, and adding that little thing before the big reveal? It makes it seem like Sly doesn't care about the risks or consequences of such an action, and that's a pretty big problem considering his relationship with Carmelita. Speaking of that, the Sly and Carmelita relationship is another thing which is interesting on paper, but executed poorly. These two always had feelings for each other, which they couldn't express because they're contradicting occupations. Now that they've actually dated for a while, Sly being forced into his old life can throw a wrench into it, and it doesn't really work when he considers stealing something behind their back for no reason. If that itch was written out of the script, then this entire relationship drama could have worked much better and have more of a dramatic effect. And if we are on that note, Sly and Carmelita are probably the most toxic relationship I've ever seen in fiction. Upon discovery, Carmelita is mad that Sly lied to her, and yeah, that's a fair thing to be angry about, if she weren't technically guilty of the same thing. This is something no one brings up, and I want to say it now. Carmelita technically lied too. Yes, Sly faked his amnesia, but she didn't know it, and she gave him false info regarding who he really is. You can't be mad at someone for lying if you were lying yourself, and yet everyone who's talking about this, not to mention the game itself, puts Carmelita as if she's the one in the right. No! Sly may have been the first to lie, yes, but you can't ignore the fact Carmelita is a hypocrite. And moreover, Carmelita's main thing against Sly was that he was a thief, ignoring the master part of the title and not caring that he only steals from other thieves. He's still a thief. Which means that lying to a liar, according to her own logic, is still wrong. She's just as wrong in this situation as Sly is. End of story. That's another reason why Sly feeling an itch bothers me, since it feels like the thing he wanted more than anything isn't at all important anymore. Honestly, for a plot point that they spend quite the time on, Sly and Carmelita's relationship is just unhealthy to either side, and I ended up thinking both are maybe better apart than together. If Sly were forced to come back to crime, which would have been done easily by removing that one line and having the surprise of the TVS Raccoonus vanishing dictate his action, the story would have been stronger, and it would put into question Sly and Carmelita's relationship in a much more believable and fitting way. Not to mention, Carmelita could have given Sly a chance to explain himself, because despite him lying, she would have known the reason to why he did it. She obviously won't date him as long as he's a thief, so she should piece together the reason. She's a police officer. She has a brain capacity for it. God, I just went on this big ass tangent, and this is just from one line at the start of the game. Let's see what else there's to talk about, shall we? The gang steals a dagger from ancient Japan in order to travel back to that time period and help Sly's ancestor, Ryoichi Cooper. And I hate to already harp about another thing, but this time travel method is kinda weird. It's different from other time travel stories, yes, but it's also highly specific and very not intuitive. The time machine needs an object from the time you are traveling to, which is interesting, but for such a high stakes mission, wouldn't it make more sense for Bentley to install a calendar-based navigation system? This just makes the plot look convenient whenever the characters just happen to get an item they need in order to get to the next stage. And this is a nitpick in the grand scheme of things, but I just wanted to bring this up as how to not do innovation. Actually, now is the point where I can be a bit positive about parts of the story, because the plots in the individual levels aren't bad. The idea of a group of criminals either seeking out refuge in the past and using the past in order to make a profit in the future is actually pretty awesome. It doesn't go much anywhere, but I promise I'll talk about the good stuff now, so I'll forget about the villains for a second, then mention the ancestors. We heard a lot about those guys from the previous games through slyly briefing us about their achievements during their time, and getting to meet them and see what they were like as characters is really cool and fun. Ryuichi is calm and wise, but also brash and quick to act without thinking, not to mention that he is voiced by Steve Bloom. Tennessee is wild and hyper and yet sensitive and somewhat tactful. Bob just makes me laugh because I can be an immature person. Gallet is a brave and honorable warrior who is also a goofball. Salim may just be my favorite though. The bad guys caught him on his very last heist before retirement, and he gives almost zero shits about anything. He complains all the time, he sasses everyone. I'd argue he doesn't even want to be there, but he does it anyway because he does care, somewhat. I'd love a whole story about Salim actually, that would be pretty awesome. Continuing the streak of good things to talk about, I found myself enjoying most of the villains. They're nothing amazing, but they're fun. I can't say much about them, but they're hammy in their own way. El Jefe is a tough mercenary who may not be deep, but Nolan North's over-the-top performance make him a great time. Toothpick is alright, I didn't hate him or anything. The Grizz, I really like for the scheme alone. His thing is that he steals stuff from the present, hides them in the past, and then digs them up in the present for cash. It has some plot holes here and there, but it's a really creative scheme. Miss Decibel is enjoyably tragic, and yeah, that's about it. Alright, let's not cut around the bush anymore. The Penelope twist! What the fuck? This makes no sense from any way you're looking at it. Did we just forget that Penelope had a tiny crush on Sly before dating Bentley? She still saw him as a friend by the end of Sly 3, so where did this need to destroy his family legacy came from? She claims that Sly's honorable thieving mentality slows Bentley down, but... is it? We never saw it happening, and we never saw her having a problem with it before, so where did that accusation come from? Writers, that's a big morality argument, and that's not a throwaway motivation. Also, we did this. Penelope disguising herself as a character with black in the name? That's her Sly 3 chapter all over again. What happened? Why was this needed? Speaking of disappointing villains, let's hear it for the worst main villain in the series, La Paradox. Guess you could say that him being a skunk fits because he stinks. Okay, give me credit, it's better than a lot of the jokes in the game. Anyway, La Paradox has a beef with the Coopers, typical for a villain in the series. What makes him interesting on paper, he is a descendant from a family of thieves himself, although way less successful than the Coopers. La Paradox's father wanted to commit a crime and framed Sly's father for it, but Sly's dad was one step ahead and managed to both commit the crime himself under the competition's nose and frame La Paradox's dad for the deed. Not the worst backstory for a rivalry, honestly, but again, the execution sucks. Actually, this backstory doesn't even matter to the plot, because during the final fight between Sly and La Paradox, the dude actually admits that what went down between their fathers isn't the reason he went on this big time heist against the Coopers to begin with. He basically did all of this shit to make a name for himself as a good thief by rectifying the Coopers' history, which means the main motivation behind this prick's action is ego, which is lame. Hell, you know something? It's even lamer when you take into account he did nothing in the story to award him the title of the main villain. Penelope provided him with the time machine blueprints, which he stole from Bentley. All the canes were stolen by different members of his crew. Did this asshole even accomplish anything? Even Sly calls him out on his BS, which means the writers knew this guy is a loser to the point they had the main character acknowledge how much of a loser he actually is. They knew the character they created is a dipshit, and yet this is what we got. Why establish this guy as a possible threat from the past if they were never planning to do something with it? You know what, let's talk about Sly's father for a second. Connor Cooper, I believe that's his name, has always been a central figure in this series despite the players never meeting him personally. Not only does he serve as Sly's inspiration and role model as a thief, but all the stories essentially revolve around Sly having to deal with some of his father's unfinished business to some extent. The first game is about Sly avenging him. The second game may have less of a connection to Connor specifically and more the entire Cooper family lineage, but it can still count as Clarkle did kill Connor. The third game really built up on it, with having Sly meet the two members of Connor's Cooper clan, one of which was also the main villain of the game who is trying to get the Cooper fortune out of spite for how Connor treated him. So you're making a fourth Sly Cooper game, where the main hook is the time travel plot point left from the previous one. You let us meet Sly's ancestors, whom we learned about previously as we travel through time, and not once did it cross your mind to have Sly meet Connor. It was right there! Sly 3 also ended with Sly realizing that being a Cooper doesn't mean he's anything like the others, and especially not like his father, which resulted in him retiring from crime to be with Carmelita and making his own pet. And you couldn't give us Sly meeting his father as an adult and the two potentially having clashing ideologies? Think about it! The theme of the original trilogy was Sly dealing with some form of generational trauma, constantly feeling the need to live up to his family name, leading to his ultimate decision to leave that behind and move on from crime to pursue his own path. Why not make the next installment all about him going against this old mentality and growing as an individual? Continuing where Sly 3 left off. I admit that it's not fair to criticize a game for what it isn't, but I can criticize a game for doing the bare minimum with an idea when a much better, much more fitting with the series, and far more interesting option was right there in front of them. But if I'm going to criticize the game's plot for what it is, let's talk about the characters themselves. I know we already discussed the ancestors and the villains, but let's go over the main cast now. I'll start with Carmelita because I already talked about her hypocrisy before and there isn't much else to say about her honestly. It's nice seeing her helping the gang more directly, doing heists, and Grey Delisle is the best VA to portray her to date, but these are the only two credits I'm able to give her. The messy relationship with Sly isn't engaging due to both sides as I established, and by the end, Carmelita just becomes a damsel in distress. Yes, she was in that position before, but once rescued, she actually did something to help. Not here. I also literally couldn't care for her flirting with the ancestors. I almost forgot it happened. Moving on to Sly himself, it's weird. On the subject of Carmelita, he might be guilty too, but the game framing him as the sole problem in this relationship bugs me for the reasons I mentioned already. Sly doesn't even get a say for his part of the debacle, which really annoys me. I know he loves Carmelita and he feels guilty, but if she can rip into him, then you know what? Dude can get a chance to explain himself and the game doesn't give him that chance. He can call out the villains fine, but once it comes to Carmelita, the sass is gone. As for the rest of the game, he's alright. I think his sarcasm is a tad overplayed, or at least simplified than previously. Sly is sarcastic, but he is also smooth. He'll make fun of his enemies, but there would always be an edge to it. Direct jabs at them for their lack of skill or failing at what they do. His jokes here, though, they feel more like something Sonic the Hedgehog or Spider-Man would say, not Sly Cooper. Bentley and Maury are fine, but not sure what to feel about their arcs. Maury feeling useless to the team honestly comes out of nowhere, and he feels a lot more like his Sly 1 counterpart, which isn't true at all. Bentley getting over Penelope is a good moment for him, but again, the twist itself sucks, so any good you could squeeze out of it doesn't really matter. Overall though, they're fine. They can get a laugh every so often, so you know what? Credit where it's due. Well, there's nothing else, right? It's time to talk about the ending? Okay, let's talk about the ending. Le Paradox's time machine blimp is crashing down with Le Paradox somewhat escaping and Sly having no way to escape. Bentley attempts to search for Sly using his technology, but to no avail, and the game ends on an unnecessary cliffhanger which, 10 years later, is still unresolved. If you got the game's Platinum Trophy, you get an extra tease showing Sly ended up in Egypt, and that's it. There was a DLC level planned, but it was cancelled because the game didn't sell that well. Can I say anything which wasn't said before? This ending sucks, no other way to say it. But if I have to direct some sort of criticism towards it, why end on a cliffhanger? This game was in a lot of ways a risk. A sequel to a platformer series which was quiet for 8 years in 2013 was probably not the easiest sell. The game was even delayed in order to avoid competition with some big 2012 releases, just so that it could have a chance, but the PS4 was released less than a year after, so that probably didn't help. The odds of this game selling well were slim, so why bother with a cliffhanger? The answers will never be clear, I'm afraid. There are rumors of Sly coming back, but after the movie was cancelled and the show is in hibernation, I am not holding my breath. Though you can be sure, I'll love to see anything happen. Sly Cooper deserves another shot, and to have this messy story conclude and hopefully improved upon. Platformers are making a resurgence, so who knows? Maybe this TV raccoon will find a way to sneak back into store shelves. And you be damn sure that I'll be the first to steal him from that shelf. But as we all wait for any announcement regarding the future of Sly Cooper, all we're left with is this frustrating cliffhanger to a messy story which had potential to be sure, but it never lived up to it. I will stress again that Sly Cooper Thieves in Time is a good game, even a great one. In terms of gameplay, it did a great job translating the PS2 series to the PS3, minus the motion sections. I have no idea what that was about. We need to remember, however, that Sly Cooper didn't strike a chord with us just because of its tight gameplay. The story and characters were just as tight and important to the experience. And if that other half of the package isn't up to par to its predecessors, then I'm sad to say it deserves to be brought up. I don't want Thieves in Time retconned, however, nor do I want the series to reboot or to get remastered. I want a conclusion. I want this story to be improved upon and not ignored. I want to see a resolution to Sly's story and for him to have a satisfying conclusion. Thieves in Time may have been a lacking attempt from the story side of things, but it doesn't mean the next game can't improve on it. And even if it wouldn't, I want to have a conclusive ending for a franchise I hold dear to my heart and not have it forgotten in a weird limbo. Come on, Sony, let's get Sly out of Egypt.